The sky hadn't been blue in decades, not since the Arxani ships arrived and blotted it out with their steel-gray leviathans. First came the promises: technology, peace, trade. Then came the chains. Most people didn't notice it at first. The slow erosion of sovereignty. The way leaders suddenly spoke a little softer. The laws that started changing, quietly, without votes. They called it integration, cultural harmony. But by the time Earth's governments realized what they'd traded, the decisions were no longer theirs to make. By year 5 of occupation, humans weren't citizens anymore. They were resources. Factories turned into labor camps. Cities into monitored zones. The Arxani didn't torture or scream. They didn't need to. They had systems, protocols. Every day was a reminder. You were not in charge. You existed to serve. And I? I worked the reclaimer fields outside what used to be Denver. They called us scrappers, digging up old Earth tech the Arxani didn't understand, sorting metal, stacking it into clean cubes for their transports. They watched us work through drones with blinking red eyes. We were allowed 2 breaks. If you didn't move fast enough, they took hours off your meal rations. If you talked back, they took your hands. My name doesn't matter. Not yet. I'm not a hero. Not some ex-soldier with a vendetta. I was just a man who lost too much and had nothing left to fear. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Like most revolutions, it didn't start with a battle cry. It started with silence. I was in Sector 9 when it happened. Just me, a few dozen others, and one of their lower enforcers, a rankless Arxani with a silver mask and a plasma whip. He looked at us like we were insects. When his drone flagged one of the workers for slacking, a kid, barely 20, skinny and shaking, the Arxani walked over and tore the boy's ration card in half. No food, no water. 3 days, the enforcer said in that cold, mechanical voice. The boy fell to his knees, begged. The Arxani raised the whip. Something in me snapped. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I grabbed the jagged end of a metal pipe I'd pulled from the dirt earlier, stepped forward, and drove it into that bastard's throat. It didn't kill him right away. He screamed, this horrible, high-pitched thing I'd never heard from their kind. The drone tried to fire, but someone else tackled it before it could. A woman. Her face was covered in dirt and dried blood, but her eyes were alive. Within minutes, it spread. We'd spent so long being quiet, being scared, that when the first blow landed, it was like lighting a match in a room soaked with gasoline. The guards didn't expect resistance. Why would they? For years, humans had complied, obeyed, cowered. But that day, in Sector 9, we didn't. We tore the enforcer apart, with tools, with fists, with fury. When his blood hit the ground, we tasted freedom again. Just a drop. And it was enough to wake up something the Arxani forgot we had. Rage. The other sectors didn't believe it at first. We sent word through the tunnels. Underground sewer lines the Arxani never bothered to monitor. Sector 9 is free, we said. We killed them. We're taking our lives back. Some called us liars. Others prayed we were telling the truth. 3 days later, another enforcer was found strung up outside the main depot in what used to be Phoenix. Then another in the ruins of Pittsburgh. It wasn't coordinated. It was spontaneous combustion. After years of silence, humanity remembered what it meant to resist. The Arxani called us domestic instability units. They started deploying exterminators. Not soldiers, mind you. Execution machines. No warning, no trial, just death from orbit. We learned to hide, to move through shadows, under rubble, across scorched fields. But we didn't stop. We grew. We adapted. They thought we'd roll over. They thought our survival instincts would keep us docile. What they didn't understand is that when you corner a man with nothing to lose, he doesn't play defense. He bites. Hard. And by the time they realized it, by the time their command center started going dark, By the time our makeshift EMP cannons took out their drones mid-air and our stolen plasma rifles cracked their armor, it was too late. They should have asked what we were capable of, but no one told them what humans could do. And now they were going to learn. I didn't sleep for 3 days after I killed the enforcer. I didn't need to. Something had switched in my head. Something cold, sharp, focused. That first kill? It wasn't revenge. Not really. I didn't know the kid whose ration card got torn. I didn't care. I barely even looked at his face. But in that moment, when I watched a creature from another world decide who got to eat and who didn't, something ancient in my bones said, "No more." And that voice hasn't gone quiet since. We buried the enforcer's body in the garbage trench behind the old turbine fields. Not to hide it, no. We wanted them to find it. We left the whip and the silver mask on a stake above his grave. The message was clear. We are not your property, not anymore. The others looked at me differently after that. Like I'd cracked open a door they didn't even know was there. Some of them were scared. Most were just waiting. For someone, anyone, to show them it was okay to stop being afraid. The woman who tackled the drone introduced herself later. Her name was Lydia. Hair like rusted wire, eyes the color of cold ash. She'd lost her son to one of the early purges when the Arxani decided urban populations were too volatile and relocated thousands to off-planet mining colonies. No one ever came back from those colonies. She didn't cry when she told me, didn't even blink. Just lit a cigarette from a crushed pack and stared at the horizon like she was already halfway done burning the world down. We started gathering in the old pump station near the fence line every night. Half-broken concrete walls, rebar sticking out like ribs, a rusted roof that whined when the wind blew. It was the only place the drones didn't scan. Probably because it stank like sewage and dead rats. Perfect. We didn't call ourselves rebels. That word sounded too clean, too cinematic. This wasn't a movie. This was a meat grinder. We were survivors. And survivors had one rule: you don't stop moving. I taught them how to break apart the plasma cores in the drone wreckage and turn them into directional charges. Lydia taught them how to slit a throat without making noise. A guy named Breck, former HVAC tech, arms like tree trunks, figured out how to hotwire the old rail lines beneath the depot to move gear from zone to zone without getting spotted. We weren't building an army. We were building a virus. Each person who joined us wasn't a soldier. They were a carrier of rage, of knowledge, of memory, and that virus was spreading. The Arxani didn't know what to do. For years, they'd relied on control through fear. Shock collars, work quotas, controlled media broadcasts with friendly alien faces reminding us that we were part of something bigger. But fear only works when people still care about living. The moment we stopped playing by their rules, everything they'd built started to shake. The first time they retaliated was in Zone 11. They sent a dropship, no warning, just came down from the clouds like a blade and dropped a plasma bomb the size of a school bus on a residential block. Killed over 200 people. No military targets, no warning, just bodies. Mothers, children. Old men with nothing but bad knees and fading memories. They wanted to remind us who was in charge. But what they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that fear wasn't the leash they thought it was. It was fuel. We didn't mourn. We didn't make speeches or hold candlelight vigils. We built bombs. The next time a dropship came, it didn't make it to the ground. Breck's team buried a repurposed fusion cell beneath the landing grid and rigged it to a motion sensor. When that Arxani transport touched down, it took out the whole platoon, and part of the landing zone with it. That was the first real win, and the first time we heard him. The voice of the Arxani High Executor. He came on every screen, every transmission panel, every comm unit they had. His face was smooth, pale, hairless, almost human, if you stripped the soul out and dipped it in chrome. His voice sounded like someone chewing glass underwater. "You are not a species designed for resistance," he said. "You are an anomaly in progress, an error, a ripple. You will be corrected." Nobody flinched. In fact, we laughed. Because if he was going out of his way to threaten us, that meant we were working. We started coordinating across sectors, not just in Denver, not just the lower zones. Word came in from what used to be Johannesburg. Rogue engineers hijacked a freight hauler full of plasma rifles and rammed it into a command outpost. In the ruins of Tokyo, a group of former medical students turned an old hospital into a lab producing synthetic neurotoxin that fried Arcsani neural implants from the inside out. We weren't a resistance anymore. We were a war front. And the Arcsani were bleeding. They began to adapt, sending in cleansers, biomechanical nightmares with human limbs grafted onto exoframes. These weren't drones. These were designed to terrify. Screaming faces, serrated limbs, voice boxes that mimicked human crying. The first time one hit our sector, it tore through 20 people in under 3 minutes. I was on the other side of the compound when I heard it, a kind of wailing howl that didn't sound real, like metal weeping. I got there too late. All that was left were pieces. They pinned one of our runners to the turbine wall with a spike through his spine, left him alive, twitching. The thing just stood there and watched him bleed, like it was learning. We got it, eventually. EMP charge, straight to the chest. But not before it taught us a lesson. They weren't just trying to suppress us anymore. They were trying to punish us. But that's the thing with punishment. It only works if your enemy still believes you're a subject, if you still care about their rules. We didn't, so we gave them something else. We gave them despair. 3 weeks later, we hit their command relay hub in orbit. It wasn't supposed to work. Half our launch schematics were stolen from an old Earth military base buried under New Mexico sand. The shuttle was barely held together by welds, prayer, and caffeine. But it flew. 3 of us went up. Me, Lydia, Breck. Only I made it back. We boarded their relay satellite under a cloak field we hacked together using old mining tech and the stolen processor from an Arcsani database tower. Once inside, we planted a signal spike and dumped every bit of Earth's encrypted data into their neural stream. Old war footage, chemical weapons schematics, human psychology manuals, serial killer profiles, genocides, revolutions, chaos. We gave them a crash course in what they were really dealing with. I still remember Lydia's face as she set the timer on the overload charge. "Make sure they never forget us," she said. She smiled as the blast door sealed shut. Breck held the Arcsani guards back long enough for me to reach the shuttle. I watched the relay hub burn as I re-entered the atmosphere. Half my hull missing, fuel lines screaming. I didn't cry, didn't scream. Just gripped the controls and prayed to whatever cruel god was watching that I wouldn't black out before I hit dirt. When I woke up, I was in the sewers again. Broken ribs, burned skin, metal in my leg. But the relay hub was gone, and with it the Arcsani's central command uplink. For the first time since their invasion, they were cut off. No orders, no hive coordination, no central AI to feed them data. The galaxy was suddenly very big. And they were suddenly very alone. We watched their patrols stagger, watched their supply lines stutter, watched their morale crack. Then we hit them with everything we had left. The war isn't over. Not yet. But we've taken back 17 sectors, destroyed 2 planetary refineries, and turned their cleansers into scrap metal and cautionary tales. They underestimated us. They always did. Because no one told them the truth about humans. That we adapt, that we remember, that we carry pain like a weapon. And when you strip everything from us, when you burn our homes, steal our families, and spit on our graves, we don't beg. We don't break. We bite, and we don't let go. The burns itched more than they hurt. Or maybe I was just used to pain by now. I laid on a slab of old scrap metal in what used to be a maintenance corridor beneath the old Denver metro station. The room stank of oil, sweat, and recycled air. Fluorescent lights flickered above me, some half dead, others buzzing like dying flies. Breck was gone. Lydia, too. All I had left was a long scar across my ribs, a busted knee, and a growing sense that I hadn't come back just to recover. I came back to finish what we started. "You're supposed to be dead," said a voice from the doorway. I turned my head. Slow. Deliberate. The man standing there had half his face replaced with synth plating. His left eye blinked mechanically. The other was human and angry. His name was Harlan. Used to be a foreman before the invasion. After the Denver riot, he became the unofficial leader of the local resistance when I vanished into space. He didn't look happy to see me breathing. "You left us with nothing," he said, stepping inside. "Half the city collapsed after the orbital blast. Power grids fried, supply chains burned. The Arxani pushed twice as hard. You think we're winning?" I sat up, wincing as something inside me cracked. "We're bleeding them," I muttered. "They've never fought a war like this. They don't know how to rebuild. We do." Harlan crossed his arms. "Yeah? Try rebuilding when half your runners are dead and the rest are eating rats cooked over old engine blocks. We've lost 5 sectors in 2 weeks. Phoenix is gone. Nashville's on fire. They're pushing back." "They're panicking," I growled. "They lost command coordination. They're lashing out because they don't know how to win without control." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "You've got a plan, don't you?" Of course I did. The relay hub had given us more than just chaos. In the 30 seconds before the detonation, Lydia dumped a back door into the Arxani data stream. A failsafe. I wasn't sure it worked until last night. One of our tech crews intercepted a low-frequency signal being bounced through the old orbital rings. It was encrypted, but not Arxani standard. Human-style compression. Deliberate. Like someone wanted us to find it. When we decrypted it, the message was just one line. "Conduit is alive." The conduit was a myth. Or so we thought. Before the Arxani hit Earth, there were whispers in certain defense circles about a fail-safe AI buried beneath the Pacific, designed not to fight the invaders, but to outlast them. A digital arc. It stored every major weapon schematic, medical breakthrough, industrial blueprint, and military protocol known to humanity. And then it went dark. The moment the first Arxani ship hit Earth's orbit, the conduit vanished off the grid. Theories ranged from self-destruction to government sabotage. But I never bought any of it. You don't build a machine like that to let it die. You build it to sleep. And wait. And now, it was calling home. "We find the conduit," I told Harlan, "and we stop running." He shook his head slowly. "Even if it's real, even if it's still operational, how the hell are we supposed to reach it?" "You know what's between us and the Pacific coast?" I did. Zone Red. The Arxani had sealed off the entire western corridor of the U.S., from the Rockies to the ocean. It was their fortress now, automated defense walls, cleansing drones, kill zones, 100 miles of silence. They turned it into a graveyard. Nothing came out. Nothing went in. At least, not alive. "We go underground," I said. "We still have access to the old military tram tunnels, the ones built during the Cold War. They weren't mapped in the Arxani scans. It's a shot." Harlan looked like he wanted to punch something, but he nodded. "Then we'd better move. Because if you're wrong, I'm not." He didn't argue again. 2 nights later, we were rolling through darkness. Our team was lean, 15 of us, all fighters, no dead weight. We called ourselves ashwalkers, because when the smoke cleared, we were always the ones crawling out of the ruins, still breathing. The tram we used was barely functional, powered by a converted solar coil and patched wiring. It moaned the whole way down the line, shaking like it was scared. And honestly, I didn't blame it. We passed through dead cities, buried roads, abandoned bunkers filled with bodies long turned to dust. Some still wore their uniforms. Some still had their hands clasped in prayer. It wasn't the silence that got to me. It was the absence of hope. Like every corner of these tunnels remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. We hit our first blockade at the Bakersfield Junction. A collapsed tunnel. Arcsani drones had swarmed it weeks earlier and collapsed the structure to prevent unauthorized movement. The ceiling had folded in like paper, twisted with rebar and scorched bones. We worked for hours to clear a way through. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from deeper in the rubble. Faint at first, like wind through broken glass, then clearer. Human. Alive. Harlan and I dug faster. When we reached the source, I nearly dropped my weapon. It was a kid. 13, maybe. Filthy, covered in ash and bruises. One eye swollen shut. And behind him? 3 more. All children. They said they were part of a refugee group that tried to cross into Zone Red weeks ago. They'd been hiding ever since, scavenging, waiting for someone to come through. We took them in. No questions. Sometimes hope is buried under the worst rubble, and sometimes it's still breathing. 3 days later, we reached the edge of Zone Red. No sunlight. The air was thick with old smoke and something worse. Ionized ash. The ground crackled with static. The skies above glowed faintly red from the atmosphere being fried by repeated plasma strikes. This was their heartland now. Their wall. We moved slow. Quiet, every step a gamble. We saw things that didn't make sense. Human bodies twisted into bioconstructs. Things that used to be people, now wired into Arcsani machines as processors. They moaned when the wind blew. Lydia once told me hell wouldn't be fire. It would be silence. She was right. But we kept going. The coordinates from the message led us to a derelict facility on the coast. A rusted metal door set into a cliffside, barely visible through the salt-cracked rocks. The old military insignia above the frame was faded. But I knew it. We all did. Project Duskline. The place the conduit had been built. We pried the door open with plasma cutters. The inside was pitch black. We lit our path with salvaged lanterns and moved fast. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Not just temperature, emotionally cold, like the place had never been touched by sunlight or warmth. Then we found it. A room the size of a stadium. Empty. Except for one thing. A single terminal. Glowing. Still active, still waiting. I stepped up, laid my hand on the scanner. It blinked, scanned. Then the screen flickered to life. Access granted, command level recognized. Rebooting system core. Conduit online. The voice that followed wasn't human, but it wasn't alien either. It was calm, measured. "You are late," it said. My heart stopped. "Conduit," I whispered. "You were real." I was always real. Humanity simply chose not to remember me until desperation made it convenient. I stepped closer. "We need help. Weapons, protocols, blueprints, anything. You require more than tools. You require clarity." The room shifted. Screens exploded to life. Images, files, data, weapon caches, coordinates, AI-guided artillery platforms. Experimental prototypes the world governments had buried before the collapse. Then something else. They were never supposed to reach Earth. What? The Arcsani. They were misled, provoked, drawn to your planet by a signal, a false beacon designed to paint Earth as a threat to the galactic order. My blood went cold. Who sent it? The conduit paused. Then, a faction of your own. Human separatists who believed the only path forward was to draw the enemy in, force unity through shared suffering. They wanted the fire to come, so humanity could become something else. I couldn't speak. All the death, the war, the slavery. We invited it? Not all humanity, but enough. Enough to make the Arxani act. I clenched my fists. So what do we do now? You finish it. The floor split open. Below it, a vault, filled with weapons, armor, technology centuries beyond what the Arxani had seen us use. It had been waiting. This is what they feared, I whispered. Not our numbers, not our strength. Our will, the conduit's voice echoed through the chamber. Let them learn what humans become when cornered. Let them learn what they unleashed. The armor didn't feel like a suit. It felt like memory. Old rage forged into steel. Every piece that locked into place over my body carried a story, a weapon tested in some forgotten lab, a prototype never mass-produced because the world was too scared of what it could do. Gauntlets powered by kinetic pulse regulators. Shoulder plates resistant to plasma penetration. An exospine made to absorb shock from freefall drops. Humanity had never lacked power. Just permission. The conduit removed that. Now we weren't asking. The rest of the team suited up in silence. Harlan took the heavy rig, massive forearms equipped with magnetic recoil cannons. 2 of our snipers went with stealth armor that bent light. The others, including the Ashwalkers, picked adaptive gear designed to synchronize with muscle memory after only a few hours of wear. None of us looked like soldiers. We looked like vengeance made flesh. The children we rescued stayed back at the vault. The conduit assigned them to secondary shelters deep under the complex. It had a plan for repopulation, genetic diversity, preservation of cultural memory, a seed vault for the human soul, it called it. But we didn't come here to plant. We came to burn. The first target was Skyhook Prime, an orbital tether hub that the Arxani used to refuel their planetary gunships and store supplies. It hovered 120 kilometers above what used to be Sacramento, tethered by a reinforced carbon cable thicker than a skyscraper. According to the conduit, severing the cable wouldn't just destroy the hook. It would create a kinetic whip effect that'd slam the orbital platform into the surface at terminal velocity. An extinction-level strike. For them. We launched from the Pacific shore using a magnetic accelerator the conduit had been hiding beneath the old naval base. It fired us like bullets into low orbit. No one breathed during the launch. You didn't have to. The suits kept us alive. But every second of that trip felt like being born again, violently, through fire and metal. Skyhook Prime came into view like a fortress built by gods. Endless corridors, metal cathedrals, alien towers floating in low gravity. The Arxani had no idea we were coming. That's the best part about underestimating a species. You never see the knife until it's inside you. We breached through the cargo bay. Fast, clean, brutal. They tried to fight, and we showed them exactly what the conduit gave us. Harlan's gauntlets tore through their shields like wet paper. Our snipers bent light, slipping through hallways like ghosts, dropping targets before alarms even triggered. I used a pulse blade that turned air into heat, cutting down a dozen Arxani in a corridor before they even raised their weapons. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were the answer to their arrogance. By the time they realized it, half the station was on fire. We reached the central power core just before their lockdown protocol kicked in. The conduit's override signal dropped their systems like dominoes. One of the Ashwalkers planted the charge, a single line carved into the wall with his knife before he left it, ticking. For Phoenix, we barely made it out in time. The cable snapped mid-descent. Skyhook Prime fell like judgment. You could see the impact from space. The cloud took minutes to bloom, then covered half the continent. Dust, flame, screams. They felt it. They all felt it. We hit 3 more facilities in the weeks that followed: an orbital refinery near the Arctic Circle, a biolab in South America where the Arxani were trying to rewrite human DNA to make us docile, a fortress in what used to be Moscow, where they trained human collaborators as enforcers, traitors who wore alien insignia and tortured their own for scraps of comfort. We left none of it standing. At the lab, we found test subjects, barely recognizable. Stripped of memory, their eyes dull and white. One of them looked up at me as we entered, whispered the word "mother" before convulsing and dying on the table. We didn't collect data. We didn't tag evidence. We burned everything. Lab, scientists, records. Some things aren't meant to be studied. Some things need to vanish. But then they adapted. They started jamming conduit signals, cutting off our uplinks, slamming decoy feeds into our comms to spread false data. It was smart, it was fast, it was human. And that's when we realized something worse. They had one of us, not just a prisoner, a defector. The conduit had warned us this might happen. Some humans, broken too deep, chose survival over dignity, trade knowledge for protection, language, physiology, military tactics. The Arxani weren't creative, but they were precise. And with a human helping them, they could copy what we built. It was only a matter of time before they did. We needed to find the defector. And we needed to make an example of him. The trail led us to Orion Bastion, an atmospheric dock tower in what used to be Alaska. The cold there didn't matter anymore. The land was scorched. The air burned your lungs. We moved fast, silent, through the ice fields. Inside the bastion, we saw it. Human-designed weapons, armor cut in our style, tactics mirrored from our own playbook. They were building counter-units, synthetic soldiers with human neural maps, clones maybe, cyborgs. Worse, and at the center of it all, a voice we recognized. Broadcasting orders, using our words, a human voice. His name was Commander Dell before the war. Now, just a name in red on the conduit's list. He walked out to meet us in the hangar, flanked by 2 Arxani guards. Calm. Smooth, wearing hybrid armor that pulsed with alien light. "You think you're fighting for freedom," he said, "but you're just delaying the future. You're dragging your people through pain for nothing. The Arxani will win." "No," I said. "They already lost." He smiled. "You really think humans are worth saving?" I didn't answer. I shot him in the throat. The guards lunged. Harlan tackled one into a turbine engine. The other melted under pulse fire. Dell gurgled on the floor, bleeding, dying. I knelt beside him. "They should have known better," I said. "You should have known better." He didn't get the dignity of a last word. I put a knife in his eye and walked away. That night we didn't celebrate. We didn't talk about how many we'd killed or how many more we'd need to. We sat in silence inside the burnt remains of their cloning lab. The conduit transmitted quietly in the background, a list of remaining strongholds blinking on the screen like a to-do list for a very personal apocalypse. And I realized something. We weren't fighting to survive anymore. We weren't even fighting to win. We were fighting because they made the mistake of thinking humans could be tamed. And now, we were making sure they remembered us, not as victims, but as the nightmare they invited into their home. We're not the same species that fell under their heel all those years ago. We've become something else, something harder. Something that refuses to kneel, even with a knife to the throat. And if they think they've seen the worst we can do, they're about to learn the truth the hard way, because no one told them what humans could do, until it was too late. We had no illusions anymore, not about survival, not about peace. This wasn't a battle to win back what we lost. It was retribution. Every step we took now was on ground soaked in blood, theirs and ours. And at this point, the difference didn't always matter. We were becoming the weapon they feared. That wasn't the goal, but it was the consequence. And that consequence was coming to collect. After Orion Bastion, we knew they were scared. You could smell it in their patrol shifts, their radio silence, their retreat from outer zones. The Arxani were reorganizing, pulling back into the core of their occupation grid. Which meant one thing. They were protecting something. We had no interest in poking shadows or dragging this war out for another year. We were done scratching the surface. It was time to tear out their heart. The conduit confirmed what we suspected. The Arxani Central Relay, Nexus Core, was located beneath the remains of what used to be Los Angeles. Buried under 15 kilometers of rock, defense grids, and layered atmospheric mines. The place wasn't just a base, it was a throne. That's where they issued orders, where they studied us, where they ran experiments, and worse, where they took those we never got back. You don't forget people like that. Not their names, not their faces, not the way they disappeared without a trace, because some bastard in that nexus wanted to know how human nerves worked under stress. I'd seen the data, I'd seen the videos, and once you see something like that, the war stops being about strategy. It becomes personal. We prepped for 6 days. That was all the time we could afford. Any longer and their scanners would catch the movement. The conduit had been masking our signal with pulse interference and weather loops, but the Arxani had begun triangulating us. We had to move before they locked in. The assault team was stripped to 24. No reinforcements, no backup, just the best we had left. Ashwalkers, old guard, survivors. Every one of them had bled for this cause. Some had nothing left to return to. Others just didn't care anymore. The ride south was silent. We passed through what used to be towns, cities, places that meant something before the invasion. Now they were just carcasses with broken windows and wind that howled through empty streets like it was trying to remember laughter. Somewhere outside San Jose, we saw a playground, rust-eaten, a single swing still hanging by a thread. Breck stopped the convoy and stared at it for a long time. Then he spit on the ground, climbed back in, and said, "Let's burn this place to the ground." Nexus Core wasn't visible from the surface. The city above it had been wiped clean by orbital sterilization years ago. A flat wasteland of glassed concrete and melted steel. It looked like the end of the world had come, took a picture, and left. We entered through a breach tunnel the conduit located, an old subway line they'd used as a cooling vent for their underground reactors. The stench hit us first. Burnt chemicals. Decay. The kind of rot you can't explain unless you've walked through a battlefield after the bloods had time to ferment. We moved slow. Careful. Every corridor was filled with motion sensors, automated turrets, or something worse. Biofused sentries, machines wired with human nervous systems. They didn't just shoot at you. They screamed while they did it. Harlan took the lead. His armor could tank the hits, draw fire, and punch a hole through whatever stood in our way. I watched him tear the skull off something that had once been a man. The thing begged him in a human voice to stop. He didn't. Neither did I. We reached the Nexus Core gate on the 3rd day. Behind it, their high command. The Arxani who had orchestrated the invasion. The ones who viewed humans as biological material to sort, classify, and discard. They called themselves the Oracles. They didn't expect us. Why would they? In their mind, we were insects. Primitive, savage, easy to break. But here we were. Not just alive, evolved. The fight wasn't fair, not for them. We came in like wolves starved for a decade, The room exploded into fire. Breck's cannons dropped 2 guards in one blast. My pulse blade carved through alien armor like cloth. I saw Harlan wrap a chain around one of the Oracle's throats and drag him down screaming. And Lydia, wait, she wasn't with us. She was gone. That pain cracked through me like a whip. No warning, no sense, just memory. Lydia's voice, Lydia's fury, Lydia staring into my soul back in Sector 9 when this all began. She was dead. So why the hell did I hear her voice? I froze. Long enough for one of the oracles to slash across my chest. The armor held, but I hit the ground. Hard. The oracle leaned in, claws dripping blood. And then he spoke, in her voice. She burned for nothing, it said. My vision went white. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I ripped his head off with my bare hands. The conduit warned us before the mission. The oracles had been experimenting with voice prints, memories, psychological warfare. They pulled voices from captured soldiers and used them in close quarters to destabilize resistance fighters. They'd stolen Lydia's voice, used it like a knife. And that was it. That was the line. I emptied every round I had into the rest of them. Then I pulled the thermal core from my suit and dropped it on the command altar. Breck looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I had, but not enough to stop what needed doing. Go, I told him. Hell no. Harlan, drag him out if you have to. They didn't argue. They knew what this was. I stayed behind. I waited until I could hear the hum of the reactor begin to peak. Then I stared down at the oracle I'd left breathing. And I told him, you should have killed us all when you had the chance. Then I detonated the core. But I didn't die. The conduit had anticipated this. Its drones retrieved me from the rubble, half dead, burnt, broken, but alive. They rebuilt me. Not with metal, with purpose. I became more than I was. Not a man anymore, not really. Something sharper, harder, something built to finish this war. They call me the Echo now. The sound that comes after the last word is spoken. And I'm not done speaking yet. You see, Nexus Core wasn't the end. It was only the first head of the Hydra. We found files in its database, logs of communications with off-world Arxani fleets that hadn't yet joined the occupation. They were waiting, watching, evaluating us. And now they know. Now they see. Now they realize they've made a mistake, because we're not going to stop with Earth. We're not going to rebuild and retreat. We're coming for them, for every world that stood by and watched, for every species that turned away when we begged for help, for every ally that stayed neutral, for every child they broke, every mother they starved, every name they erased. Humanity doesn't forget, and we don't forgive. You want to fear monsters? Then fear what you made us become. Because we're coming, and no one will be able to say they weren't warned. The sky looked different from orbit. Not because it was beautiful, not because of awe. It was quiet. Too quiet. Down on Earth, even with the fires and the ruins, you could hear the wind, the echoes, the rumble of war. Up here, there was nothing but silence. And I was done with silence. The conduit stood beside me in the observation deck of the recovered Arxani dreadnought. Not physically, of course. It didn't have a body, just a shimmering projection of energy, human-shaped only because it chose to be. They will not believe you're coming, it said calmly. I kept my eyes on the display screen. A galactic map, pulsing with red markers, Arxani strongholds blinking like veins waiting to be cut open. They believed we'd submit, I muttered. Let them choke on the surprise. Behind me, the Ashwalkers were arming up again. The crew was leaner now, leaner but sharper. Harlan's armor was patched with more welds than original plating. Breck's right hand had been replaced with a plasma-forged claw after Nexus Core. A few of the new ones, kids who grew up in fire, looked half feral. Not recruits, survivors. One of them barely said a word, carried around a blade made from his father's spinal rods. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were avengers. And the only thing worse than a soldier with a cause? A man who lost everything and kept moving anyway. We called the operation Ashfall, the target, Sithar Prime, the Arksani homeworld. They called it the cradle of empire, the sacred soil of their species. Untouched for millennia, it was more than a planet. It was a symbol, their pride, their origin. We didn't want to take it. We wanted to ruin it. The conduit mapped the planetary defense systems from ancient interstellar data it had stored during the old Mars colony years. Most of the Arksani outer fleets were still caught in conflict across nearby sectors, too distracted by Earth's uprising to protect their core. But Sithar Prime was far from defenseless. Orbital shields, thermal planetary cannons, EMP spheres that could collapse AI units in seconds. Even the conduit couldn't guarantee we'd survive insertion. "I don't need survival," I told it. "I need destruction." It paused, then gave me everything I asked for. The drop was hell. We launched in stealth pods that burned hotter than hellfire. Arksani radar pinged us 30 seconds after entering their atmosphere. Defense grids opened up. Plasma rained down from the heavens. 2 of our pods were vaporized before they breached the cloud line. I don't remember hitting the ground. I just remember waking up inside a crater, half buried, suit alarms screaming in my ear, Harlan's voice through the comms yelling something about flanking fire and holding the line. I staggered to my feet and saw it. Sithar Prime. It wasn't what I expected. No towers of steel, no glittering cities. It was organic. Sprawling structures that pulsed like living creatures. Buildings made of bone, chitin, some kind of bioengineered material that twitched when you got too close. The Arksani didn't just live on their world. They were their world, and now we were infecting it. We moved through their jungles first. Black vines wrapped around massive trees that hissed when cut. Every step triggered motion sensors. Every breath felt like inhaling needles. The gravity was thicker here, the air heavier. Sithar Prime hated us, and we loved it for that. By day 3, we'd taken out 2 relay towers and intercepted a command drone trying to escape the zone. The data it held gave us a blueprint of their capital hive. A sprawling mass of interconnected chambers, grown from a central queen brain that directed thought, order, and punishment. That's what we needed to kill. We weren't here to topple a city. We were here to execute a god. The conduit called it the Cerebra Core, the neurological center of the Arksani mind web, where collective decisions, emotions, and memories were synthesized. It wasn't a leader, it was a brain, a living symbol of unity. Destroy it, and the empire fractures. Permanently, they would still have ships, still have armies, but no will, no cohesion, no soul. Getting there was blood. Pure, unfiltered, hot blood. The core was guarded by the 7th Fold, Arksani elites bred for single combat, 8-foot monsters with skin like obsidian and weapons that looked like they had been carved from the bones of extinct species. We met them in the canyon just outside the hive mouth. It wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. Breck lost his left leg before he even fired a shot. He didn't scream, just shouted for someone to hand him an explosive and crawled toward one of the fold with it primed. I heard his laughter right before the canyon lit up. The explosion dropped the ridge. 6 of them died. So did Breck, but it gave us a crack, and a crack was all we ever needed. Harlan took 3 hits to the chest before he reached the gate. His suit locked up. He forced it open by screaming so hard the mic cut out. I saw him go down with a fold's blade through his stomach. But not before he wrapped a plasma chain around the thing's neck and snapped it like a wishbone. By the time we reached the inner chamber, there were only 6 of us left, and what we found inside was worse than we imagined. The Cerebra core wasn't a machine. It was a being. It pulsed, breathed, a massive fleshy dome suspended by cables and nerve tubes the size of trees. Inside its translucent walls, we could see neurons firing, memories playing, scenes of our world burning, of our people screaming, of children ripped apart and studied like insects. It saw us the moment we entered, and it spoke, not in words, but in feelings. Regret, anger, disgust. It pitied us. That broke something in me. We didn't waste time. We fired every round we had. Pulse cannons, EMP grenades, acid charges. The Cerebra howled in a sound that shook our spines. Its walls cracked, screamed. It began projecting visions into our heads. Lost friends, dead family, old regrets. Trying to make us hesitate. Trying to remind us what we'd lost so we'd forget why we came. I stepped forward through the illusion of Lydia, bleeding and begging me to stop. And I drove the fusion blade straight into the core's heart. The world convulsed, the air ripped open, and every Arxani on the planet screamed, not in pain, in disconnection, like their gods had suddenly gone silent, and they didn't know how to breathe without being told. The conduit pulled us out before the planet cracked. Its final override triggered orbital bombardment from hijacked Arxani fleets, now severed from their command structure. The conduit took their ships, turned them against their own. Sci-Fi Prime burned. The cradle of the Empire became a pyre, and the galaxy finally saw what humans could do when they stopped playing defense. I don't know how many of us made it back. Sometimes I think I didn't. That I'm still in that hive, still burning. But then I see what came after. Arxani warships drifting without course. Planets rising in rebellion. Species long enslaved now armed with human weapons and human fire. And Earth, it's breathing again. Still scarred, but free. They'll speak about us now, in whispers, in warnings, in terrified respect, because no one told them what humans could do, and now? They know. The war didn't end with a declaration. No treaty, no surrender, just silence. After Sci-Fi Prime fell, the Arxani fleet fragmented. Some ships drifted, others self-destructed. A few tried to retaliate, lashing out at outposts, civilians, fringe colonies that had nothing to do with any of it. But without the Cerebra core, without command, they fought like beasts cornered in a fire. Uncoordinated, reckless, lost, and in time, they stopped fighting. Some ran, others knelt. The rest, we buried. But winning a war isn't the same as ending it. No one tells you that. No one warns you what it feels like to finally put the knife down and realize your hands don't know how to stop shaking. I was discharged from the conduit's operative network 4 weeks after the strike on Sci-Fi Prime. Not because I was unfit, not because I lost my edge, but because there was nothing left to kill. The conduit itself went quiet. Not offline, just still. Like it had completed its task and was waiting for a question we didn't know how to ask. I spent the first few nights on Earth sleeping with my boots on, one eye open. Not out of fear, out of habit. You don't come back from war the same man. You come back half. And if you're lucky, you remember which half was worth keeping. The cities were gone, of course, or at least what they used to be. What remained were rebuilding zones, modular shelters, food pods, solar rigs, clean water rationed by code, medicine distributed through what passed for hospitals. I walked through the ruins of what used to be Chicago. Steel bones, ash. A woman selling roasted rat on a stick gave me a nod like she recognized something in me. Or maybe just smelled the blood still trapped in my skin. There were people laughing again. Kids running barefoot through cracked sidewalks, chasing a rubber ball like it was the only thing that mattered. It hit me then. We'd won. But I didn't feel peace. I felt hollow. A man approached me near the old courthouse ruins. tall, gray-bearded, one prosthetic arm, the old hydraulic kind from before the invasion. "You Echo?" he asked. I didn't answer. He didn't need one. He reached into his coat and handed me a data pad. "Rebuild Council's asking for you. Says you're the reason there's still a planet left to rebuild. Thought maybe you could help him not screw it up again." I took the pad. Didn't look at it, just shoved it in my pocket and walked away. They kept trying. Every week, a message. "Echo, we're forming a planetary charter. We need leadership." "Echo, we're trying to unify the outer colonies. We need your story." "Echo, the Arxani are surrendering by the thousands. We need you to speak for the fallen." I ignored them all. I wasn't a leader. I was a blade. And blades don't sit in rooms full of pens and papers. They rust or they wait. But even rusted steel remembers how to cut. It wasn't long before we learned not all Arxani were gone. The conduit picked up signals, pockets of survivors forming coalitions out in dead space, scavenging ships, stealing tech. Rumors swirled, a splinter sect called the Reseed trying to reclaim their empire, this time by assimilation. No invasion, no ships, just ideas. Their message was simple. Peace through submission. They came with smiles, with knowledge, with pity. They offered healing in exchange for silence, resources for compliance. They weren't conquering anymore. They were infecting, and some humans welcomed it, especially those who never fought, those too young to remember the chains, or too tired to resist them again. That's when I came back. Not to join the council, not to write speeches. I came back to warn them. The war didn't end. It changed shape. They weren't using weapons now, they were using forgiveness. As a knife. I stood before the Charter Council in what was left of Capitol Ridge, an open platform surrounded by solar towers, the flag of Earth stitched from scorched cloth above them. The woman who ran the meeting was young, clean-faced, sharp voice, a politician born after the fire. "Commander Echo," she said, smiling too tightly, "thank you for joining us. You're something of a legend." "I'm not a legend," I said. "I'm a warning." Some of the council members chuckled. She didn't. I dropped a packet on the table. Inside were decrypted transmissions from Reseed operatives, intercepted by a splinter conduit node still active near Jupiter. Terms like cultural erosion, empathy implants, gradual reduction of violent potential. They weren't killing us anymore. They were rewiring us, one idea at a time. The young woman's smile faded. "So what do you propose?" she asked. I looked around the table, saw the tired eyes, the diplomats, the planners, the reformers. "I propose you stop pretending this war is over. You want us to fight again?" "No," I said. "I want you to remember, because if you forget what they did, then we'll end up right back where we started. Just slower, softer, nicer." "Echo, no more surrender," I cut her off. "Not even the polite kind." I left before she could respond. Didn't need her approval. Didn't want it. That night, I visited what used to be a prison outside St. Louis. It now housed former Arxani collaborators. Human ones. Guards who'd turned over civilians. Scientists who'd assisted with forced experiments. Politicians who'd handed over cities in exchange for power. I stared at them through the bars. None of them looked at me. They knew who I was. One of them started crying. Another smiled like he thought I might forgive him. I didn't. Forgiveness is a privilege of the living, and some ghosts don't deserve peace. The days blurred. I traveled, spoke to outposts, found old ashwalkers living quiet lives on the edge of the wastelands. Some had families now, kids, lovers, peace. I didn't interrupt them, didn't drag them back. They'd earned that much, but I made sure they knew. "It's not over. Stay sharp." The look in their eyes told me I wasn't alone in thinking that. We'd tasted the edge of extinction, and none of us were naive enough to think the galaxy suddenly respected us. Fear isn't the same as respect, and we still had plenty of work to do. The conduit came back online a few weeks later, only briefly. A transmission, just a single message, a signal from beyond Arxani space, not of their origin. Investigating. I didn't sleep that night. Something in my gut twisted, like the edge of a storm brushing your skin before the clouds break. You see, the galaxy's not a clean place, never was, and now that humanity's proven it can bite, every predator out there is going to start watching closer. Some with interest, some with fear, some with hunger. And when they come, they won't make the same mistake the Arxani made. They won't underestimate us, but they'll still come. Because that's what the stars are. Endless, cold, and full of things that need to learn what a human really is. Not just blood and bone, not just rage and sorrow, but the one thing no empire has ever managed to kill. Defiance. The first time I heard the signal, I thought it was thunder. But thunder doesn't echo in space. It wasn't loud, just a quiet ping in the comms, pulsing every 8 seconds. Steady, patient, ancient. The conduit picked it up from deep beyond Arxani space, a point on the galactic edge marked only as Sector Null. No known colonies, no trade lanes, no history, just silence. Until now. The conduit didn't say much, just a few lines. The signal is not Arxani. It predates human civilization. Do not ignore it. That's how it started. Not with fear, not with orders, just a question. And after everything we'd done, everything we'd lost, the one thing I couldn't tolerate anymore was not knowing. So I answered it. I went alone. By choice. Not because I thought I wouldn't come back, but because I didn't care if I did. I boarded a long-range scout ship, the Nomad 7, and pointed it toward Sector Null. No crew, no escort. Just me. The conduit's echo stored in the system core, and the ghosts I'd never quite outrun. They say space has no memory, that everything fades out there. They're wrong. It remembers every scar, every scream, every sin, and I had enough sins to choke the stars. The journey took 17 days. No contact, no interference, but on the 18th, we crossed the perimeter. The signal grew stronger. The hum turned into sound. Then voice. Not alien, not human either. It was familiar, terrifyingly familiar, like a version of me speaking from a mouth that had never existed. It said one thing. We saw what you did, and we understand now. That's when I knew. We weren't alone. We never had been. The ship landed on a fragment of a world, not a planet, not even a moon, just a jagged hunk of stone floating in empty black, surrounded by broken structures and long-dead satellites. There was no life, no power, no air, but I stepped out anyway, and found them. Not bodies, not machines, memories, carved into walls, floating through the void in translucent strands of data. Thoughts, emotions, moments, an entire civilization turned to code. The conduit's voice activated in my earpiece. This is not a place, it is a grave. I walked until I found the core. A pulsing white sphere cracked down the middle like a heart split in grief. And then I heard it again. The same voice, only this time, it was mine. I am you, it said, a version of you that never fought, that surrendered, that tried peace, and was erased. My breath caught. This wasn't another species. It wasn't a warning. It was a mirror, an echo of humanity, one that chose to kneel, one that never survived. I stood there a long time, listening to their history. They'd reached the stars before us, built faster, dreamed bigger. But they believed in unity, in cooperation, in hope, and the galaxy crushed them for it, wiped them clean. because they came to the table without claws, and now they were gone. Nothing left but a memory loop playing in the dark, waiting for someone like us to find it. Someone who fought, someone who burned the sky to survive. I left Sector Null with that knowledge welded into my spine, and I knew what had to come next. Not peace, not rebuilding, but preparation. Because we weren't the apex. We were just next in line. And the ones watching now? They'd seen both versions of us. The one that died on its knees, and the one that stood in fire. Guess which one scared them more? Back on Earth, the new government was trying to pretend things were normal again. Trade routes, education programs, colonization expansion. They even printed currency again. Paper money, like wrapping the future in skin. But I didn't go home. I didn't pick a city. I went to the cold places, frozen outposts on the edge of the map. Settlements too far for comfort, too harsh for politics, where people lived like the war never ended. Because for them, it hadn't. They knew. You could see it in their eyes. The same haunted edge I wore like armor. We didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Some truths don't need words. Just readiness. Years passed. The world changed. Kids grew up never seeing an Arxani, never feeling a whip, never smelling burning flesh or hearing the drone sirens at 4 a.m. I was glad for that. But I also feared it. Because forgetting is worse than losing. Forgetting is what makes the next war possible, and the one after that. The conduit stayed quiet for a long time, until one day, out in the wastes of Mars Colony 3, I got the ping. Not a warning, not a call, just data, a new species, no name, no translation, but they were coming. Not with ships, not with fire, with questions. And questions are always the start of conquest. So I sharpened the blade again. Old suit, old scars. Strapped on the weight, because someone has to be the first to say no, to bare teeth before the bite comes, to show the stars that Earth doesn't kneel. Not anymore. I'm not a hero. I'm not a symbol. I'm just a man who remembered what happened the last time we waited. And I made a promise in blood. If you come for us, we come for you, and no one will ever forget what humans can do.